Human beings have existed for 300,000 years and have managed to live in many unstable environments. We've survived ice ages, devastating pandemics, and world wars. But how would we fare even further back in time? What about 400 million years ago, when deadly marine life dominated our oceans and creatures on land were practically non-existent? Let's imagine your what-if time machine happened to break down right at this moment, trapping you in the Devonian period. This is what if, and here's what would happen. Stroke of luck, our time machine stops you on land. At this point in time, 85% of the Earth was comprised of ocean. Only two supercontinents existed 600 million years ago. Gondwana had a massive mountain range similar to the Himalayas, which slowly eroded, washing sediments into the ocean. These sediments provided nutrients that allowed marine life to flourish, giving rise to the Devonian period. Okay, enough background. Our first step for survival is to seek shelter. In the early Devonian period, trees and plants had not yet evolved. But there was lots of moss. The land was barren, Mars-like, and surrounded by water. You might need to get a little creative to build shelter. If humans actually evolved in this period, they would likely be naked with little material to make clothes. Or maybe we would develop a new fashion line made of moss, seashells, and fish bones. Ooh la la, how Devonian chic. Speaking of fish bones, you'd want to be very careful about fishing. Many scary sea creatures would be happy to eat you. Like placoderms, a species of armored fish with huge sharp jaws that could easily make you bite-sized. In the early Devonian period, placoderms were the apex predator and would grow up to 10 meters, 33 feet. Let's say you got lucky and actually caught a fish, without being eaten yourself in the process. How would you cook it? With no trees for fuel, you'd have to find some very dry moss and start rubbing some rocks together. Luckily, the climate was pretty warm, meaning you wouldn't freeze at night. But with very little kindling available, you might be better off sticking to a raw diet of mollusks and other early arthropods. You'd also have to move around a lot to keep finding these critters, so be prepared to do a lot of walking. I can see you're getting a little tired and bored existing out there. Let's fast forward another 40 million years toward the late Devonian period. This period is also known as the Age of Fish. But don't worry. It could actually be a really good time for you, fearless traveler. Since by this point, almost 79% to 87% of all existing species were wiped out. What could cause such a catastrophe? Scientists believe it was the evolution of plants. Vascular plants began dominating the environment, including trees, ferns, and flowering plants. Their roots broke up the rocky ground and released nutrients and minerals in the water. These nutrients fed algae, which multiplied rapidly and produced greedy bacteria that fed on oxygen. Many regions of the ocean became oxygen deprived, and much of the marine life died off due to the lack of oxygen. With more air in the atmosphere, some sea creatures slowly adapted and made their way to shore. So, you can breathe easier knowing there are fewer predators in the water, but look out for your new neighbors on land. These land dwellers, known as Tiktaalik, were the early ancestors of amphibians and all four-legged land vertebrates. In fact, the Devonian period got its name from the fossils of lobefins found in Devon, England. In 2004, a lobefin fossil was found in the Canadian Arctic known as Tiktaalik, which is considered to be the species between fish and land-dwelling tetrapod. It had a crocodile-like head, bony fins, sharp teeth, and a flat body almost 3 meters, 9 feet, long. Its fins had partial wrists allowing it to crawl on land. So, if I were you, I would quickly hide if I saw a Tiktaalik coming my way. The other dominant species were cartilaginous fish with skeletons covered in, you guessed it, cartilage. These are the ancestors of sharks and rays. But you don't have to worry about sharks. Oh no, there's something far bigger, and scarier. I'd keep my distance if you happen to see a Dunkleosteus swimming around. These were the deadliest predators of the Devonian age, with thick, bony plates covering their skulls and razor-sharp jaws. Some would grow up to 10 meters, 32 feet, in length. Their jaws were strong enough to chomp right through another Dunkleosteus. With few fish left because of plants hogging the oxygen, these placoderms were starving and desperate enough to eat each other. So, be very careful where you bathe. With more trees and plants emerging in your environment, you could finally create some helpful tools, like spears, fishing hooks, and rope. You could improve your diet and maybe become a vegetarian. And you could fashion some new clothes that aren't so irritatingly itchy. By the late Devonian period, you might even be able to build yourself a treehouse in the first tree on Earth, which grew up to 30 meters, 90 feet, tall with a trunk 3 meters, 9 feet, wide. This may be nice for a while, but if you think the Devonian period is easy, you might want to plan a hasty exit before the Cretaceous period rolls around. Who knows, maybe ancient life found a way to escape our planet. That sounds like a story for another what if. Human beings have existed for 300,000 years, and during that time, we've endured the harshest conditions imaginable, from ice ages and devastating pandemics to the chaos of world wars. Through it all, we've adapted, found ways to survive, and made our mark on history. But what would it have been like if we had to survive in even more ancient times? How would we have fared 400 million years ago, when the Earth was a very different place? Back then, our oceans were teeming with deadly marine creatures, and the land was practically empty. To imagine such a time, let's step into the world of the Devonian period, an era that is often referred to as the Age of Fish. But what if, instead of reading about it, you were transported into it? Let's imagine your time machine malfunctions, and you find yourself stranded in the Devonian period. You're stuck on land with nothing but your wits and instincts to keep you alive. You have no trees, no shelter, no clothing, and nothing familiar. In this moment, you're left to consider, how do you survive in such a hostile world? Fortunately, you've arrived on land, rather than in the vast ocean. This is a stroke of luck, because, during this period, around 85% of the Earth's surface was covered by water. The continents were vastly different, and two major supercontinents existed, the most notable being Gondwana. Gondwana, which was a massive landmass located mostly in the southern hemisphere, boasted enormous mountain ranges, not unlike the Himalayas, which were slowly eroding. The erosion washed massive amounts of sediment into the oceans, providing the nutrients necessary for marine life to thrive. This is what eventually led to the rise of the Devonian period, a time when marine life exploded in abundance. Now, it's time to think about survival. The first step? Find shelter. However, this is no easy feat, as the land at this time was barren, resembling something more like Mars than Earth. With no trees or large plants, you'd be surrounded by moss and other primitive plant life, which was the dominant form of vegetation. Trees and flowering plants had not yet evolved, so your options for shelter would be limited. You might have to get creative, building shelter out of moss and mud. It might not be much, but it would be enough to keep you from the harsh elements. And speaking of clothing, don't expect much. Humans had not yet evolved, but if they had, you would likely be naked, relying on whatever materials you could find. Moss, seashells, and fish bones might serve as your fashion statement, and you'd be sporting the Devonian chic look in no time. As you settle in, survival becomes a matter of food. But here's the catch: marine life is abundant, but many of the creatures in the oceans could easily be your predator. Take, for example, the terrifying placoderms, a group of armored fish that grew up to 10 meters, 33 feet, in length. These predators ruled the waters and were known for their massive, sharp jaws capable of tearing apart anything in their path, including humans. If you were lucky enough to catch a fish yourself, you'd have to figure out how to cook it. With no trees or firewood in sight, you would have to gather dry moss and try rubbing rocks together to create a fire. It's not ideal, but it could work. On the bright side, the climate was warm, meaning you wouldn't freeze at night. However, food wouldn't be easy to find, and your diet would likely consist of raw mollusks and early arthropods, which were abundant, but you'd have to move a lot to find them. Get used to a lot of walking and a very raw diet. As you try to survive, you realize that the longer you stay in this period, the more you begin to notice changes in your environment. Fast forward 40 million years into the late Devonian period, and things have changed dramatically. By this point, many species have been wiped out. Nearly 79% to 87% of all life on Earth had been lost. But what caused such a catastrophic loss of life? The answer lies in the evolution of plants. By this time, vascular plants had emerged, dominating the landscape. These plants, including trees, ferns, and flowering plants, were not just changing the land, they were changing the ocean too. The roots of these plants broke up the rocky ground, releasing minerals and nutrients into the water. This process led to an explosion of algae, which fed bacteria that consumed vast amounts of oxygen. As a result, many regions of the ocean became oxygen-deprived, causing marine life to perish. On a positive note, the increase in plant life on land meant that you could finally begin creating tools. With the first trees emerging, you could use wood to craft spears, fishing hooks, and rope. These tools would make hunting and gathering much easier. Your diet could even improve, as the land became more habitable for various plant and animal species. And if you wanted to improve your fashion, you could start making clothes out of plant fibers and animal skins, which would be much more comfortable than moss and shells. By the end of the Devonian period, you might even be able to build yourself a treehouse in one of the first trees to exist on Earth, which grew as tall as 30 meters, 90 feet, and had a trunk 3 meters, 9 feet, wide. It would be a welcome change from the harsh, barren environment you had initially found yourself in. However, the Devonian period was not the final chapter in the Earth's history. If you thought life in the Devonian was tough, you'd need to prepare for the next major shift, the Cretaceous period, when dinosaurs and other formidable creatures would dominate the planet. As life on Earth continued to evolve, who knows what other challenges future humans, or their ancestors, might face? That, however, is a story for another time.